Welcome back to Living the Questions podcast. We are celebrating a full year since I started this podcast, and I cannot believe it's been a year. And also, I cannot believe it's only been a year. I don't understand time so much of the time. um, and yeah, I started this podcast a year ago, and it ran from the spring equinox of 2025 to the summer solstice. And then I had planned to come back for the fall equinox, the autumnal equinox, to the winter solstice. And it turns out that that season is not necessarily my time for that type of creation. It's more of a time to be moving inward. And this makes sense to me that I would be moving into a spring season. I would be moving into, astrologically speaking, Aries season, which is all about action and starting things and moving forward. And spring is this new rebirth and new life and, yeah, feeling of energy coming back. And so to me, it makes sense that the output would feel a bit more connected in this one season. And not that it doesn't exist in the fall, but I seemed to find that I think that my spring to summer is the answer for me. I'll play and I'll see where it takes me here. But yeah, I was finding that the fall is more of a time where I want to be creating in different ways. And so it was really sweet to get to come back for a second season, test that out, and then discover that spring equinox is the time, for me personally. And it's nice to get to test out what lands here. What I wanted to do for this first episode back, especially now that we're a year in, and that this is celebrating 1 year, is to really just reflect on that year of time, and what it's brought up and who I find myself to be from the first episode to now, which is wild to think about this time last year, where I was and where I find myself now. And it's interesting too, because I recorded my first episode well before it actually aired. So it would have been a year before. It would have been like a year since I recorded that episode would be somewhere in the end of 2024, which means, it's been longer than a year. And I still like thinking about, what has all of that time brought me? What has this podcast specifically invited me into? What did creating it in the first place invite forward, and where has that journey led so far? And a big piece of that actually is this piece that I've learned about my heart and the way that I go after things in this world, which is I learned that creation is relational. And I don't think that's specific to me, but I know for me specifically, that is true. And what I mean by that is that we're in relationship to all the things around us and everything we make. And so to me, what's been really sweet about this podcast is that sometimes I'll have a guest on and I'll get to actually be relational in a way of getting to relate to another person, getting to co-create a conversation, an exploration, getting to learn more about their beautiful expression, their story, their heart. And there's so much that can be brought to life out of that. There's so much reverberation that gets to be had out of that. So it can be quite literally relational. But what I also mean by creation is relational is that it isn't stagnant. It's not something to be forced. It's actually something to be in relationship with. And so for me, the creation of something like this podcast is not just something to say, okay, this is what it is, and this is how we're going to execute this plan, and be tied to exactly those things. I think I thought a lot of creation is in those, more structured pieces. And it's not that it doesn't require discipline and structure. And also, I've learned that it requires a whole lot of being being open to letting things unfold, to letting things meet you, to letting things become clearer, um, to be able to be in relationship to something that is going to evolve and change and show itself over and over again. And can we meet that each and every turn differently? Um, can we bring ourselves to that? And can we meet what it's becoming as it's becoming, rather than staying stuck in what something needs to be, quote unquote, from what we originally maybe, set something out to be as we were creating it in the first place. And so I think there's a really cool invitation with creation being relational. And I think what's been really sweet about what I've gathered from that is that I've learned through all different facets of life over the last year and change that we can we can make all of the plans in the world that we want to. And I think it's beautiful to definitely dream and to create plans and directions that we want to set ourselves out going in, and um, definitely aim ourselves in the direction of where we're headed, um, and get clarity, to be able to have clarity on that and to go after clarity on those things. And so much of life is unpredictable, and so much of life is going to meet us in a million different ways and a million different times. That's going to ask us to pivot and going to ask us to widen perspective and change course, even if it's, I'm going to come back to this direction, but I need to just shift here for a second, whatever that may be, for whatever reason that may be. And also it might mean I'm shifting course, and then this is the direction that I'm going in now, which is slightly next to this original path, or 180 from this original path. Life is wild and unpredictable in a lot of ways. And that can feel really unsettling and really uncomfortable and really scary, honestly. And also, when we become acquainted with life in that way, where we recognize that so much of it is asking us to be flexible to change, not ungrounded, right? Like we get to figure out what rootedness feels like inside of ourselves. This is where we grow things like self-trust. This is where we grow foundational pillars in our lives that really can hold us no matter what storm is occurring. Um, and that includes feeling like we're free falling, and having supports around us that really can help us in those moments, those times, those seasons in life. And yeah, so there's this piece of getting to, maybe it won't ever feel comfortable to be in that unknown and unpredictability of life. And when we can get into a relationship with what life is in that way, if we can get into a relationship with the ability to understand that this is a bit of what life is consistently going to bring, um, yeah, how does our relationship to life change? How does it actually like, yeah, like even just as I said that, I exhaled. Like, how do we unbrace from being so worried with how life will maybe, you know, blindside us? Um, because that fear is just not a place to live from. And it doesn't mean we don't protect ourselves. Um, it doesn't mean we don't, you know, we're not there to be aware of what potentially could be something that we need to be prepared for. Um, it it just means that the way sometimes we feel we need to or are unconsciously holding tight to control life doesn't need to be that way and actually hinders us from the ability to relate, the ability to create, the ability to, yeah, to move forward in life in any way that actually allows us to feel alive, to feel like we're actually living our life, not just floating through the days or watching time pass by. And yeah, there's a freedom in being able to acknowledge that life, that, yeah, that life is something that we almost, yeah, something that we can almost guarantee will be unpredictable. And can we have freedom in that? Can there be spaciousness for freedom in that when we have the access to have that spaciousness? Because there are going to be days where, we self eye roll at our own selves for trying to offer that kind of information. We just don't necessarily have the capacity some days to really be with the reality of those pieces. They can feel bypassy and fluffy and um, frustrating, like almost like we or someone else is trying to like fix what just feels like I just need to feel. I just need to feel frustrated by this. I just need to feel angry that life isn't more stable and certain and secure, and we get to feel that. There's so much wisdom in feeling that and giving that voice and giving that merit. And when we have access to actually see the power of what that might offer us when life is unpredictable, and where that gives us room to be less rigid in our lives, to be a bit more open, to have a different relationship with creation where we're releasing the idea of force and control. Where does that impact the rest of our lives? Um, and how powerful can that be? How much more spaciousness is available within ourselves, within, than everything we relate to from that space, because that's what we're bringing. If we're tightly wound and trying to control everything and land security in these certainties or these specifics, we're going to be stuck and disappointed often. And again, disappointment is so welcome and is a beautiful thing to get to be with, because it really lets us know what is important to us and gives us the ability to communicate that to ourselves, to one another. And how do we take good care of ourselves when we are disappointed, when we aren't able to have something go the way that we want it to go, or know where the next step is, or know where the path is going. And again, it's not to say don't dream. It's not to say don't plan. It's to say, can we imagine these things and hold them with open palms? Can we imagine these beautiful parts of the human experience that we want to get up to and after? And can we allow ourselves to not be so deeply critical of ourselves and each other when things don't necessarily go exactly as we might have thought in the beginning or exactly as we planned throughout. Because what if it unfolds in a different way that actually is a way we could have never planned for? And what if it unfolds in a way that's really, just painful and sad and not at all what we would want? And unfortunately, that does happen sometimes in life. And so we can have the blessing piece of things where things surprise us and allow us to be met in these beautiful ways in life, even if it feels clunky in the midst of it, even if it feels challenging, um, to be able to like pull the lessons later and and like mine the wisdom, the beautiful gold from the experience. And also there are moments where we are blindsided by life and uncertainty in deeply painful ways that we may never mine a lesson from, um, because it's and we may, but the painful pieces feel different. Lesson feels kind of like we're diluting the meaning of that. And it can still technically be that we're mining wisdom from these experiences because we most definitely are. And how do we honor that piece that I know I've said previously in this podcast of I like give me the wisdom without that chaos, give me the wisdom without the loss. And still, if that is happening, can I honor the wisdom that's come from it regardless? Can I hold the both and there that I really wish this didn't occur and it will never be okay? And can I honor the wisdom that I receive from that experience, from me walking through that experience, from who I am now, from where who I was to where I am now through that experience. And I think that again, this is the relational piece. We're deepening our relationship to ourselves. We're deepening our relationship to others. We're deepening our relationship to whatever we create from here, allowing it to unfold over time, allowing it to become, allowing it to unfold. And in that way, it's reminding us of what it means to be human. It's reminding us of what it means to, yeah, to invite ourselves to do the same, to unfold, to become, to not need to be in this perfection state, even if we don't think we're up to it. Where might we actually be up to doing that or putting that pressure on ourselves and needing it to be a certain way or show up a certain way, or how we might be living out survival, coping skills and survival mechanisms where we don't realize that we're leaking energy and we're not actually there to relate. We're just our protective internal parts of ourselves, and survival instincts have kicked up and come online for us without us even realizing. And we're, in this mode of needing to show up this very specific way in order to feel a semblance of security and stability that we've learned over time. And man, how human that is. Man, how much compassion we can bring ourselves to just know that we're all up to something like that at different times. And can we create space over time to get curious about when that's happening and how we might meet that differently and how we might be able to show up just a little bit more without that, um, or to bring it online when it is really needed and to make the choice to do so, um, and or be in such deep trust with self that that you know your body will kick it in when it is needed most. And what a gift that is. Like how amazing is that? It's, to me, it's so cool. um, I was going to go through so many other pieces of what I feel like I've learned from this year, this experience. My God, there's so many. So maybe that's what this season becomes. But I'm recognizing that this one was big and necessary, and feels like maybe that's what this episode needs to be. Only this. And only this is like 50 million nuanced things within it. But um, yeah, this specific one about creation, being relational, um, and I think part of that too is that in relationships, that's where we actually are able to be seen. And why I started this podcast in the first place was challenging that fear for me of being seen, being heard, um, and creating a space to play with that, to practice that. And I think so much of the time we're so nervous to let ourselves be seen by even our own self. How many times are we internally editing? And again, this is that perfectionist piece. How do I need to show up in order to belong, to be accepted, to fit in, to live up to the identity that I have created for myself and believe I need to be, or has been created around me and I have lived into and believe I need to be? And I think there's something really interesting about letting ourselves be seen inside of relationship, how and on all the different ways that relationship comes to be, which includes this right now of making this podcast. It's, the this is a relationship, and I'm relating to you. I'm showing up with my honest self and reflections in this moment, and I'm getting to relate to whoever might be listening to this. And my words may land in you in a way that sparks a conversation inside of yourself or with someone else, where you get to relate deeper to yourself or to that other person you're connecting with, on things that have sparked from this conversation. And that's relational. That's so beautiful. And the part about being seen is that it can really only happen in relationship. There needs to be someone else to see, something else to see you. And that feels really vulnerable, but also really beautiful, that it is inherently relational to be seen, to be heard. And when we allow ourselves to do that, it helps us understand who we really do know ourselves to be. Because when we allow ourselves to be seen, and it isn't exactly, we can, it isn't exactly landing for us. We can tell when we're not fully showing up. And I think there's such valuable information in that, to be able to be in relationship, to go after being seen, and to recognize where all of a sudden you're like, oh no, wait, I shut off there a little bit. I didn't even notice I was doing it. And then, oh, that, there's something there that didn't fully feel like I was able to do that. And I'm curious about why. I think like that type of living into the questions, that type of curiosity about ways that we can further allow ourselves to be in more of our truest self, our full expression, just our humanness, just to be able to be you unedited in a way that's responsible still, but not constrained and not forced and not a facade, is a wild human dance that we all do. It's a wild human dance. And I think that's why I almost like I heard all the words I needed to put around that there. I feel like it's necessary to do that, because it isn't just unedited, right? Because that can That can mean a million different things. That can be wildly irresponsible. And we are responsible for our impact. To be alive is to be responsible for our impact. It just is. And um, you can choose not to be, and there's consequence to that for sure. But to be someone, coming from the heart is to be someone who honors the responsibility of how we show up and the impact we inherently will have on anybody around us. And again, it doesn't mean hypervigilance. It doesn't mean that we need to be, overthinking absolutely everything. It means the openness inside of relationship, the openness to be able to, um, to be able to widen perspective about your own self as one of those things, to be able to show up as you are with a freer expression and be open to the ability to perhaps hear how that lands for other people. And what's interesting about that is that much of the time you may learn that how that lands for another is so much more wildly beautiful than you could have ever imagined, because most of the time we are wildly self-critical internally and we don't even realize it. Um, yeah, it might be so, so, so deeply, subconscious behavior that we don't even know how critical the voice is on a consistent basis inside of ourselves. That it might be hard to receive the kindness of another person, but over time, when we allow ourselves to be seen, can we titrate those beautiful pieces to come in to be able to help us see ourselves more clearly? And from our own self too, can we grow in that internal kindness, that the words that would allow us to be truly kind to ourselves? And then there will be times where we will be met with things that maybe feel unkind, but perhaps are just honest, but feel uncomfortable to receive because we may interpret them internally as inherently being wrong or being flawed or being a failure or just feeling not good enough. And all these internal criticisms that live deep in our bones and blood come up and will likely say something like, see, I was right. And, either get deeply defensive because I cannot feel that way. I've been doing so much to not be seen that way that I need to protect this, or deeply defensive in a different way, which is to just fully collapse into, I know I'm not good enough. I always knew it. And to fall into that and just take it all on. And what if we met that differently? What would it look like to not immediately assume that those internal criticisms are what this person is trying to apply to what they're seeing? What if they're just giving us another viewpoint of something that we haven't been able to see about ourselves? And can we give ourselves the ability to say, this is too much. I need little bits at a time of this, or this is too much. I'm going to come back to this. And recognize that it can be a gift if we allow it to be, and if we can separate how we view our whole selves in that moment, to not take it as to not take it as a knock on your entire being and your identity, because that feels like we're bringing ego in now, of who you see yourself to be. What if we allowed space in who we see ourselves to be, where it doesn't have to be so rigid, where our stability isn't in our identity in that way, but it is in a multidimensionality of being a human. It's allowing more room for a more nuanced identity. And maybe our stability isn't in our identity. Maybe our stability is actually something that is too constrained by what our identity has been and the security we've placed in that. Where are we feeling like we've created a ground for ourselves just to make sure that we have one that actually isn't serving us the way that we thought is a big question to live into. And I will also say that there will be things that people say that are unkind, and the practice there gets to become the self-trust piece of that actually doesn't feel true to me, and I'm you know and I really have built and I'm continuing to build that trust within myself to be able to know that clearly and to be able to then respond um, to how I'm being met, um, because there might be consequence to that, for what that other person is bringing, depending on what the unkindness is. Um, and if it's harm that's happening through words or otherwise, then that too becomes a these are where those survival pieces come up to be used in the way that they are needed to be used and are well versed. And also, this is the space where we can really parse out one from the other, because when it's harm, it's very, very different than the moment where someone is offering us loving feedback or loving challenge. And if we're compressing, if we're collapsing deep, deep harm with, or even, run the gamut of harm in any kind of way, if we're collapsing that with someone that we love challenging perhaps something that we're doing or saying due to what they're seeing, because they love us and we've allowed ourselves to be witnessed. If we're collapsing that, we're doing ourselves and our relationship such a disservice. And it's also so human to collapse that. It's so human to not know how to parse those pieces out. And can we get curious to do so that we actually are able to show up without shutting down? We're able to be seen without feeling like I need to um, brace. I need to eggshell walk. I need to, yeah, I I connect and then disconnect. And there's so many more nuances to this about titrating that process, about parsing things out, about learning things over time. And I guess the question becomes, can I give myself the space for that to be possible? Can I invite myself to be intentionally stepping into this question, this dance, and know that that parsing out, that discernment will happen over time as I meet each moment? Can I give myself the grace and space and kindness and compassion and ability to make mistakes in this place and take responsibility for them, for the impact that they may have as I learn? Because I'm going to need to learn somehow. And most of how we learn this is in relationship, including our relationship to ourselves. And can I be responsible to myself too? Can I apologize to myself as well when it's, the mistake that I have made is something that impacts me directly and hurts me or harms me? And can we practice that relationship with ourselves? And what does that look like then when we apply it externally? And we're probably doing both simultaneously, but the practice is important for both. And there's something really powerful about giving ourselves the ability to practice that discernment, to practice that parsing out, to practice being able to see kindness, to practice being able to receive kindness, lovingness that might feel a bit more heated in our bodies. And can we also discern when real harm is happening um, and hurt, and to be able to decipher those differences and take really good care of self when those cases are happening. That's the curiosity. That's the the dance, and those are the big questions to live into. So while I didn't have one specific big question to live into in this episode, I feel like many have come out, which I know tends to happen in these episodes. And just, I'm grateful for that. I'm grateful for where this took me. Again, as I started, you can set out a plan and then you got to see where it takes you. And that's exactly what I did today. Set out a plan and it unfolded how it was needing to. So thank you for being here for that conversation, for that unfolding. And I so look forward to what the rest of this season unfolds as I live into the relational practice of creation and continue to live into what this podcast really, as an expression, wants to continue to be, how it plays into other creations that I feel called to and live into. How it meets you, the person who's listening to this, and what you bring to this conversation, what you bring to what you see for this to continue to be. Because it is a collaborative piece. We're living into the questions by each other's side, and community is deeply, deeply important in that way. This podcast to me is community gathering in its own way, over time, one by one, with each person who listens. And that's really amazing to me and really special. So with that, thank you for being a part of that beautiful community and for listening into this podcast. And I so look forward to getting together with you for the next one. Thank you for being here and for celebrating 1 year and this beautiful new spring equinox with me. I'm very excited for what we get up to in it.